Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you will never miss an episode. Android users can find us and subscribe on your Play Music app. Apple users can find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can follow us on Spreaker. And you can find the podcasts on jimmyhinton.org or findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so that we can spread the word. Let's get into the show. All right, welcome to this week's podcast. I'm joined here today with myself, Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
Well, this week we wanted to talk about just our thoughts on the rally that happened at Harrisburg on Monday. Excuse me. There was a rally in support of what's known as the Mark Rozzi Amendment, and we'll explain a little bit about what that is. The hashtag is #WindowToJustice, and again, we'll explain in more detail what that is, but we wanted to talk a little bit about that rally and just the nature, the tone of it, and what it was like being surrounded by such a great group of survivors who were, most of them were mentioned in the Pennsylvania grand jury report, and we've really bonded with that group, and just over the last few weeks, I think both you and I have become really close
they
to
are a
many of them.
special group of people, and they have been hurt in ways that none of those of us who have not gone through this abuse can fully understand. But they are so relatable. They're really a super group. Jimmy and I felt honored to be part of this day at the Capitol in support of this amendment, which we'll be talking about. And the reason we're sharing this is we feel that education is necessary in this fight for justice. Mm-hmm. And the more we know, the more we're educated, the more we can do, the more we can speak out and watch this wave of movement continue. So that's our purpose today.
And I think just historically, we're living in, I think, an unprecedented moment. And Pennsylvania was, throughout the day on Monday, was referred to as the epicenter for really dark sexual abuse. During the week of my dad's sentencing in 2012, that was June of 2012, the week of his sentencing was the same week that the Sandusky trial started. So that was going on at the same time of dad's sentencing. On Monday, while the Pennsylvania House was voting on the Rozzi Amendment, which had passed the House overwhelmingly, at the same exact time that they were holding that vote, the Bill Cosby trial was going on. He was sentenced yesterday. He received a 3 to 10 year sentence. And ironically, we have just so many connections to here in Somerset, and Somerset and Cambria County. Right. So Cambria County, just north of us, is where the Altoona-Johnstown Diocese investigation started.
And we're talking
which sparked the statewide
20-something miles up the road.
Yeah,
we're not talking a little.
And Sean Doherty, who was one of probably the biggest organizer of this rally, and Sean's just been incredible. I had the privilege of interviewing him on this podcast a few weeks ago. Sean is one of the abuse survivors in the Pennsylvania Catholic Altoona-Johnstown Diocese report. And Sean is who sparked the big movement that's going on that ultimately led to the statewide grand jury investigation into the Catholic Church. So, there are all these links, and then I think it's kind of ironic and important for people to know Jerry Sandusky is in prison right here in Somerset.
Right.
He's at SCI Laurel Highlands, which is a prison that Mom and I go into all the time.
Right.
We have close friends who work in that prison, and her and I are invited to go into that prison quite often. And that's sitting 2 miles from where we sit right now. So 2 miles up the road, Jerry Sandusky is housed.
Which is where
Bill Cosby is going to be going.
Will be
so
brought.
SCI Laurel Highlands, which is here in Somerset, is, I don't know if it's the only prison or the main prison in Pennsylvania that's the geriatrics prison. So all of your elderly, unhealthy inmates wind up at SCI Laurel Highlands. We have two state prisons in the town of Somerset.
Right. Now, we have a block. That's kind of a misconception that the whole SCI Laurel Highlands is only for
it's
the
not
elderly
the entire
and
prison.
the ill.
Right.
We do have a large block of those men who are there for, a lot of them are there for the rest of their years, and they're aged or they're ill.
Or have cancer or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. And they are there pretty much, we have several deaths that occur there each year. But that's where both Sandusky and now Cosby
will be headed there probably very shortly.
Right.
So, yeah, ironically, Bill Cosby and Jerry Sandusky will be in the same prison, probably on the same block, I would imagine.
Possible.
But, it's just, I think it's accurate to say Pennsylvania is the epicenter. You have the biggest, most well-known, widespread abuse that's been uncovered in the Catholic Church to date.
Right.
That this Pennsylvania grand jury report that was published just last month uncovered the widest, most well-known, widespread abuse cover-up in the history of the Catholic Church. I think that's important. So I think it's important to know, Pennsylvania, what's happening here, as Sean Doherty has repeatedly said, the eyes of the world are on Pennsylvania right now.
Well, our legislators actually brought that out too throughout the course of the day, that the decisions that are made now are being watched worldwide. And these decisions are critical with what happens. And that's one more reason why Jimmy and I felt that it was necessary to kind of deter a little bit from our normal podcast and bring you this information today.
So we wanted to talk first of all about just the tone, the overall tone of the whole day on Monday. And, when we showed up, it was just us, a handful of people from the media, and then the survivors who were marching. And we were in a parking lot, and across the river, we're actually on City Island, which is an actual island that sits out in the river, and it sits across from the Capitol building. And so we just had a short walk from there over to the Capitol building, and just the amount of respect and love that everybody had for each other, I thought was really neat to see. Like, you didn't have angry people that were rioting and and they have, let me say this, let me be very clear, they have every right to be angry.
They do.
But they didn't come off as being angry.
And
they were educated and just...
When I hear rally, when I hear march, I think of these angry, shouting people, and I think of people with somewhat vulgar signs, and, it's my way or the highway or whatever. That wasn't the tone at all.
None of that.
It was extremely respectful. In fact, we were encouraged as the walk continued to the Capitol to make a little noise. Everybody was just quietly walking along.
And Sean kept saying, "This is not a funeral procession.
Yes, make a little noise.
Let's make some noise." But everybody was just, as we were marching across the bridge, people were just talking to each other, but it wasn't like small talk. Like, people were just genuinely having sincere conversation and letting each other know that they care for each other. And
and that's another aspect of this, that when we think of the wounded, survivors, victims of abuse, whichever word you choose, you you get this picture in your mind of maybe people who are out to get other people, get their abuser. That's not what I saw at all. They are there for a reason. They are there to bring some closure to what happened. They are there to make sure nothing of this magnitude ever happens again.
Yeah.
And we need to remember that as we, are working through this whole legal thing.
Well, I saw too, like, I think this was really important. It's important to point out, like, the amount of respect that they showed even toward politicians who they know are opposed to this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nobody was in your face. They weren't,
nobody. No.
They weren't disrespectful ever. There was not one point where tempers got flared, where, people were disrespectful, and they were so cool.
Right. We're seeing so much negativity right now with politics. That's all you see here. I actually felt that the flavor of what we saw Monday, if others could have experienced that, it might help temper some of what's going on in our nation right now. We actually saw people working together, and it was good.
Well, Mom and I sat too in the house gallery, and we were sitting with all the survivors, and it's a small gallery.
Right.
It only holds probably maybe 100 people. A pretty small gallery. But we were overlooking the Senate floor, and so we got to hear Mark Rossi defend his amendment, and there were several others who stood up and defended their positions. There were a couple who debated, and they said that they could not vote for the amendment, but they were respectful about it. But I thought what was really neat was the amount of times that Bibles came out by politicians. The one man pulled his Bible out and read from Matthew chapter 18.
I loved that.
It just was really cool. And they said, they were reading scriptures that spoke to God hating this kind of abuse. And they were like, we don't just have a political responsibility. We have a moral responsibility to do what's right. That was neat to me.
It was it was more than neat. It was genuinely good for all of us to witness and see that, to hear it. And I felt it was sincere.
It was definitely sincere.
It was.
I think the other thing that was neat was when Mark Rossi pointed to the survivors up in the gallery, he said, I want you to look at those people. He had them stand up. He said, all the survivors who are up there, I want you to stand up because this is for them.
Right.
And when Mark Rossi did that, the entire house floor was on their feet, and they gave a minutes-long standing ovation to them. And I thought that was really
chills
cool.
Up me. It really did.
Yeah.
It was powerful. Very powerful.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of thing that people need to realize. We need to humanize this to our politicians, because I don't get the sense that the Senate in Pennsylvania has the same flavor. I think some of them do. Some of them spoke at the event.
The reason the representatives, the House of Representatives, has this flavor is because of Mark Rossi.
Yeah,
he is a survivor, and he has exposed himself completely and has shared what his life has been like. And those men know, love, and respect him, the men and women who are his fellow, legislators there. And so they're very aware on a daily basis of what Mark has had to deal with. In the Senate, I'm not sure that they have that same interaction. And you're right, Jimmy, it needs to be personalized. When it becomes humanized, personalized, then it becomes real. Very real to each of them.
So we'll explain a little bit about what this is. First, just the process a little bit. This amendment was introduced in the House. It's an amendment to a bill that was passed, I think it was passed last year. It's Senate Bill 261. And this bill is in response to, so Pennsylvania's developing pretty strong laws in the wake of all these sex abuse scandals. So starting with Sandusky and Penn State, we really started toughening our legislation up. So it's been good changes. I mean, I think they're all positive. I think there's a lot more we need to do on the preventative side, but that's another episode altogether.
Right, another whole issue.
But on the legislative side, I think Pennsylvania is really doing a good job. And I think we're making some common sense laws. We're making progress. It's a slow process, but we're making progress nonetheless. Mm-hmm. So Senate Bill 261 was introduced, which changes the statute of limitations both civilly and criminally. So I think it's civilly you have until the age of 30 to be able to sue for damages and things like that. Criminally, that age is now 50.
Right.
So you have until you're 50 years old to file a criminal lawsuit for sex crimes of any kind. So I think it's a good bill. I think it's a move in a good direction. One of the recommendations from the grand jury in this Pennsylvania grand jury report that was released last month, one of their recommendations is to take the statute of limitations away completely on the criminal side.
Right.
So criminally, if you murder somebody, which is felony offense, there's no statute of limitations on that. On the criminal side, if they find evidence 75 years later,
they can open that case up.
Right. They can open up a case and you go to prison. Bill Cosby is a case in point. That was a criminal, a criminal statute where his victims were able to criminally sue him. Right. He's now gone to prison.
Right.
Because they did commit crimes. So what they want to do is remove the statute completely for criminal offenses. And I think they want to increase it. I'll have to look at these again, but the recommendation that we're talking about, there were 4 recommendations, and the one that we're here to talk about and what the rally was about on Monday was what's called, it's nicknamed the window to justice. So it opens up a 2-year window. And what that means is civilly, not criminally, but civilly, you have a 2-year window if this passes. From the time it passes and becomes law, you'll have 2 years, a 2-year window, where you can file a lawsuit against the organization civilly, and you can sue for compensation. So criminally, you can't put these guys in prison, which is a shame.
It's very sad.
But the reason that they're doing this, the primary reason, is not to get money out of these organizations. The primary reason that they're doing this is because if you sue civilly, it's on record. That person's name is on record as somebody who sexually abused you. Right. The reason that they want their abusers' names on record is because right now it's illegal for the survivors to name their abusers. Many of these abusers, many of the over 360 who are named in all of these grand jury investigations in Pennsylvania, over 360 pedophile priest abusers, these victims can't name them by name.
Right.
And they're still active in their churches. They're still creating victims. And they want to be able to get their name on record and say, this person sexually abused me. And it's not like, they can sue and just throw it out there. And we've talked about that before. Well, there has to be evidence. There has to be, there's still a process.
And that was emphasized over and over again during the day. It's not going to be this pointing a finger and saying, well, he did this to me, and I want to bring a lawsuit. There has to be hard, solid evidence. And Jimmy and I have pounded on that time and time again in this podcast. And I will say the victims on Monday stressed over and over again, it's not about the money. Not one of them has said anything.
Well, who was it? Mark Rossi
money.
who said, I don't remember if it was him or Attorney General Josh Shapiro, but one of the two said, throughout this entire process, not one time has one single survivor who was in this report, who has spoken with us countless times, not once has one of them ever brought up money. Not once. They've never brought it up.
Because that doesn't do anything to help with healing. That really doesn't. They're looking for exactly what Jimmy said. They need to say the name. They need to face their abuser and be able to say, that's the abuser, and they need to be able to have a way of stopping this. Mm-hmm. Those are the important things. Right.
So I think the two-year window was a wise thing. I'm going to read right out of the Pennsylvania Grand Jury Report. This is page 309 on the recommendations that the grand jurors gave to the state. They said, you can't very well exercise your right to sue when the people responsible are doing their best to cover up. We think those older victims should get their 2 years back, and now that the church is finally being forced to come clean. Several other states, at least 6 of them, have paved the way by creating a window of time that gives child sex abuse victims a second chance to bring lawsuits that would otherwise be too late. We've heard this has been tried before in Pennsylvania several times, and every time it is opposed by representatives of the church and its insurance companies. They say it would cost too much to let these child sex abuse victims get back their right to sue. We wonder how they decide how much is too much. Maybe they should meet with Al, as we did. Al was abused in the 6th grade by a priest who put him in a locked room, made him take off the pants of his Catholic school uniform, and rubbed his penis. He managed to slip away and tried hiding under a desk, but the priest found him and told him he would go to hell if he ever told anyone. Afterward, Al flunked the 6th grade and had to repeat it. He began drinking, working up to as much as a bottle of whiskey a day. He started scratching his genitals so hard they would bleed. He thought he must be gay, which made him a mortal sinner. He tried joining the Navy, but was diagnosed with PTSD and eventually discharged. He tried to kill himself on multiple occasions, most recently by hanging himself with a coax cable. He was institutionalized in the locked ward of a psychiatric hospital. He wanted to keep going to church, but he would become nauseous and have to throw up when he entered the building. Maybe, if he'd had money for good medical and psychological resources, Al's life wouldn't have been quite so hard after that priest knocked it off track. Maybe, if he could file a lawsuit now, he could make up for some of the pain and suffering. We wonder what people would think is quote-unquote too much money if it had been one of their kids. Al should get his 2 years back. Then it goes on, there's another little paragraph. They said, we also hear that they have an argument that there's a legal problem with the civil window, which was one of the arguments that somebody made on the floor of the House on Monday.
Right.
We are lay people. We'll leave that to the lawyers. One thing we believe, though, is that if the legislature and the lobbyists really wanted to get it done, if they really want to get real compensation to the victims of child sex abuse, they will find a way. They've found a way to stop things from happening all these years. Maybe now they can put their expertise into actually getting something passed.
I think that's the most powerful summary of that whole section there. They will find a way if they want to. Mm-hmm. And it's up to all of us to help them find that way, to see the human side of this, that it's not people just hungry to sue somebody. Mm-hmm. That's not it at all. That people like Al, there are thousands upon thousands suffering right now, from trauma. And it's difficult for those who have not experienced that type of trauma to understand what it's like. I know I every time I'm in the presence of victims of abuse, when they tell their story, I shake a little bit more inside. I cannot imagine the terror, the fear, the pain, the torment, the emotional upset. I can't imagine what they've gone through as a child. I really can't. I can't. You can't put a dollar amount on that.
No.
You cannot.
No. And right now, the argument in the Senate, so the Senate leaders are saying, well, the Catholics just announced, which I thought was ironic, 2 days before Monday, the Catholic Church announces this fund that they want to start, Survivor Compensation Fund by the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. And in the statement that they put out, which I read, they said, we believe that if this 2-year window passes, it will bankrupt the Catholic Church, and then no survivors will be able to get funding, which is total garbage. It's just not true. And so anyway, I thought that was interesting. But, what the senators are arguing right now is that they're not going to pass the bill next week when they have their vote, because they said that the Catholics have offered this survivor fund, and that's a much better route than bankrupting all the church. So they're just regurgitating what the Catholics have put out there. It was, almost verbatim that statement. It's
dancing around what they know should be done. It's a stall.
But here, here's the issue at hand, and this is why this law is so important. The Mark Rossi and even the other senators and representatives who supported it and who spoke on Monday, they said, this isn't about the Catholic Church. It's not about money, and it's not about the Catholic Church. Right. This is about any survivor who's been abused in any organization where they covered up the abuse. That's what the issue is.
It's sad that there were so many in the Catholic Church. That's horrifying.
Yeah, but imagine how many more are out there statewide.
Absolutely. And that's the point that we're trying to bring to you, too. That's why this window is so important. It is very important for all victims to have this right, this window opened up to them. And you might be saying, well, why are you saying this on a podcast? I don't live in Pennsylvania. Or I think all victims of abuse need the support of each other. We need to be supporting each other through every means possible.
Yep, on social media, right? By person. Well, Rachel Denhollander flew up too. It was her, and my brain is slipping right now, so I don't remember the other two survivors who spoke with her. They were also Larry Nassar victims.
And they stood there in unison, speaking to this group. Rachel flew in she has a little baby.
Right, a little 2-month-old baby.
Mm-hmm. And she was there to show her support.
So I think we need to say that, just because we're not from a certain state, when you see legislation that's important to other survivors. Now, I want to pause for a second because you mentioned, and I did say it in another podcast, I said, legislation is not my thing.
Right.
I still stand by that. I don't know much about legislation. But I will say, when survivors are there and I see what's at stake and how important this law is for survivors, I'm going to be there.
Right.
And so, for you and I, it only made sense to go there and to be supportive.
We're not saying everybody needs to hop in a plane and be there, but just by us giving you this education, you're being empowered. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so important. I know Jimmy and I were both greatly empowered on Monday.
Yeah, I think probably the final thing we should point out is how important it is for survivors just to continue to surround and rally around each other. And, there might be other people saying, well, I'm not a Catholic. So, this is kind of for Catholic survivors to come together. That's not the case at all.
Right.
And, again, Rachel Denhollander is not a Catholic. She was here in support of her sister and brother survivors.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter what denomination you belong to. It doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or not. I think survivors need to come together, and they really need to just continue what we witnessed and experienced on Monday. And it's that absolute love and concern and compassion for one another. Unity that's rooted in mission, and it's this mission, the overall mission is to stop other little kids from being abused by these predators. That's their mission.
Absolutely. And what we're seeing now is this wave that has started. It's a movement, and it gets discouraging along the way. Mark Rossi, he said that how many times he's been fighting for something like this for, what did he say? How long? It's been years. Yeah. It's been years. When we all stand together, that flame, that spark, that fire will not go out. It will be impossible for it to go out. Jimmy and I are just urging everyone to stay firm, continue to support, continue to fight for what you know is right, continue to be a voice. Remember, this all started with one voice, one person speaking out, and the snowball began.
So we'll leave you with our truth bomb for the day, and our truth bomb is just to never, ever give up. The door to healing is wide open, and it's opening wider and faster. Survivors are no longer going to have to remain unheard. People are definitely listening right now, and action is being taken. History is being made right now.
It is.
And so I think the climate's right for movement.
It is. It is. I hope every survivor that's listening is encouraged by this. Do not give up the fight, please. Hang in there. Changes are being made. Better days are coming.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thanks for listening to this episode, and we'll catch you next round. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker, subscribe on Google Play Music, Apple Podcasts, or Stitcher. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.